Welcome. Good afternoon. It's a very special day today, not only because we have an eminent speaker, Andy Kiser, Lieutenant Colonel Andy Kiser. That's great. So thank you for joining us. But I learned it is also the anniversary of our alma mater. So that's today, the February 22nd of February. I believe it's also around President Washington's actual biological birthday, not birthday celebrated was last week, but I think it's yesterday or today is President Washington's birthday. And today definitely is Penn State University's birthday. It was founded on February 22nd in 1855. So that's fantastic. And it's a fantastic opportunity to have you here, Colonel Kiser, and thanks everybody for joining. And as I'm going to introduce our speaker for a few moments, it will be appropriate for you to drop a brief introductory message about yourself, who you are, what your affiliation is on the chat. That will also help our speaker better tune his presentation to your needs, and then also have the necessary situational awareness to provide point on and spot on responses to your questions. This is the second lecture in our spring lecture series that you guessed it, Alison is organizing. So thanks, Alison, for doing that. And this is a particularly relevant and high-level speaker series, as you can see not only from the speaker panel, but also from the fact that this is sponsored by our Penn State Homeland Security Advisory Council. So this is a great thing. So thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Andy for presenting. And Colonel Kiser's topic will be security cooperation, in particular also covering civil military security cooperation. And as you can see, he is from the United States Army War College, but he is also a alum of Penn State. Actually, the colonel graduated in 1999 with a degree in criminal justice from the Pennsylvania State University. And he originally graduated from Valley Forge Military College and then was commissioned in the Army in 1998. He is also a graduate of the Infantry Officer Basic and Advanced courses at the Command and General Staff College and the School of Advanced Military Studies, where he earned a Master's of Military Arts and Science in Operational Art. Lieutenant Colonel Kiser's most recent assignments have been or are as battalion commander in Afghanistan. But prior to that, among other things, he also served as a battalion commander, actually the commander of the 1st Battalion in Iraq during the campaign to defeat ISIS. Lieutenant Colonel Kiser holds a number of awards and decorations, so more or less arbitrarily, let me just point out some of those. So they include the Bronze Star Medal, the Purple Heart, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Afghan Campaign Medal with 1 campaign star, the Iraq Campaign Medal with 3 campaign stars, the Global War on Terrorism Service and Expeditionary Medals, Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, and among others, last but not least, the NATO Medal. Colonel, what we typically like to do is we like to leave it up to the presenter how they would like to divide time between presentation and Q&A. We have 1 hour set aside, so I'll leave that up to you. Just give us a heads up how you're going to proceed. If you like to take urgent question in between or ask the audience to, leave their questions on the chat and then you'll address them at a later point, just as you please. Once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving back to your alma mater. We are excited to be about to hear your presentation now. The floor is all yours.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it, Doctor. So it's good to be back at and talking to Penn State alumni. It's been about I'm from Harrisburg, so it's actually been about 20 years since I've been able to get back. It's the first time the Army's been able to get me back up in the Northeast. So it's kind of good to be back here for the year. So as we go through this, I'm going to talk security cooperation, things that the military does, specifically the Army, and some of the things we've done with some of the modern conflicts and security cooperation. But as we go through this, and I can answer a wide variety of interests you guys have, but as we go through this, if you want to type your questions into the chat, I can answer as we're going through and briefing. I have no issue with typing in questions as we kind of go through. That way the questions kind of relates to what we're talking about on a particular slide. And then once I go through, if we still have time left, I have no issue to continue to answer questions as you guys feel or have those pop up. Two pertinent kind of experience I've had over the last 4 years. So in 2016, I took my first battalion command. And that's where I actually got deployed. We did security cooperation with the Iraqis to actually defeat ISIS. So that was kind of my first real big foray. Although we've done security cooperation, I have through my whole career working in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That was kind of at a higher level. And honestly, that became the model, what we did in Mosul and Iraq to get rid of ISIS, on some new kind of building enterprises organization we've done in the Army to get at security cooperation. And then most recently, as part of one of those new organizations, I commanded a different battalion in Afghanistan, and ironically got to finish off what was left of ISIS in Afghanistan, working security cooperation over there, and then ended up commanding a regional command on the eastern border of Afghanistan, and working with a lot of governors and district governors over there as part of the governance side too. So one thing, if you look at this first slide, security cooperation involves a lot of stuff. So it goes, if you look in the middle picture at the bottom, that's an exercise called Immediate Resolve with a bunch of NATO countries. So we work with Western allies all the way down to the African continent, in the Indian Ocean region, Pacific region. So it's all kinds of allies and partners across the world that we do exercises with. And that really can span from, if you look at the upper left corner, just teaching basic marksmanship skills and tactical level tasks, all the way up onto the right, you see senior military, general officer type engagements between allied partners in different military. So security cooperation has a wide range of what can happen within the context of security cooperation. Alison, if you can go ahead and go next slide. Okay, so today, what we're going to go through is I'll just cover what security cooperation really is, how it kind of pertains to our national interest, why we do it, what are some of the exercises that we've been doing, and then a really good, and I saw we had a couple National Guard members in too, is some of the National Guard partnership programs, what that does, and actually just kind of to open your eyes a little bit is a snapshot of what FMS looks like, which is foreign military sales. What equipment are we selling or financing or providing to foreign countries? And then kind of putting all that in context, what it looks like in some of the modern conflicts we've been doing for really 20 years now. It's progressed, and what we've been doing the last couple of years. Okay, Alison, next slide. Okay, so security cooperation, which in the military we call SC, it's really any engagement between a U.S. military entity and a foreign military entity. So whether it's a defense summit of different nations with their defense officials, all the way down to staff work, trying to build a partner capacity and their logistics, foreign military sales, which is us allowing some of our defense industrial companies to actually sell equipment, also providing extra equipment from our own military that is now excess, or we've moved on past that particular capability, providing that to a foreign country. We'll also provide financing for them to buy our equipment. So basically provide them a loan to turn around and buy military equipment from Boeing or one of the big defense companies. International military education and training. So that's one of the big ones. So we'll go train foreign countries how to use equipment. We'll train them how to operate as a defense force, and there's some nuance of that. And then also provide education and training. So like here at the War College, we have numerous countries that actually send some of their colonels over here to actually attend the Army War College. And that goes all the way up from our lieutenant training, all the way up to colonels. We have foreign students that come in from all of our allies and partner nations that actually come in and receive some of that education. On the training side, though, it's a little bit nuanced on how we do that as advisors or security cooperation experts within the military is there's a common trend to go in there and want to train a country to be a model of the US, which doesn't always work. So there's, when you look at a culture within a particular region, their geographic constraints and the threats they particularly face in their region, a US model is not necessarily the best way to train a particular country. So we try and look at, what are their capabilities in the context of what they can actually afford and they're capable of doing, what are their actual threats, and we try to get a program down something that would actually work for them and build some constructs behind them. Basic principles and logistics and that kind of stuff still pertain, but they may not want to, their culture, how they, their history that goes into their particular government and society may not lead it to a US approach being the best. So we'll try to work with them for that. Also includes combined exercises and operations. And those exercise and operations we'll talk on a later slide, but that runs a full gamut from actually conflict, potential war like the Gulf War when we brought allies in to fight Saddam Hussein on the first and second one, all the way up to combined exercises like the Ebola operation we did in Africa. Also international armaments cooperation. And this is kind of a big one that came out of World War II is if we're going to fight as allies, we've got to have some commonality and some likeness in some of our approaches to armaments using common rounds. That's why we call it the NATO 5.56 or 7.62 is we share similar types of ammunition. That way, when we have supply issues, we can help each other out as nations depending on how things are going. And then the biggest one is information sharing and collaboration. That really gets at trust amongst allies and partners. If we're not really willing to share information, intelligence, we're really not going to be able to collaborate with them and have them as a viable partner or ally when we need some help on things. A couple of things that security cooperation includes. So security force assistance, that's when we actually go in with military advisors and help advise them, help them work through problem sets, help them train certain military aspects of warfighting, logistics, intelligence, that kind of thing, train them on equipment. Then foreign internal defense really is what our soft community, I see way in 18 Echo in there. That's where they go in and help them fight against an internal threat that is going against the government and power of a particular host nation. And then security assistance is actually providing them actual equipment. So we talked FMS, the foreign military, for financing, that all applies under security assistance. We're actually assisting them. Alison, if you go ahead and go next slide. Okay, so and we should get another one from the Biden administration, I would think soon. But right now, we're still operating under the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. So under this one, we were really trying to get at security cooperation. So and kind of redefine things. The security cooperation enterprise within the military, there are a lot of organizations. So you've got the defense agency, you got the Defense Security Cooperation Agency that's under DoD, and then you've got several other commands that are involved in different aspects, actually across all the DoD, Air Force, Army, Marine, that do different things and they do the same thing. So it's a very convoluted chain of command and how many different entities have their hand in the pot. So they try to streamline this with the NDA, and the military is kind of working toward that. But they gave us new authorities to train and equip foreign countries. They've increased the budget a little bit. The biggest one that they've done is they've actually tried to professionalize the force. So for everyone that works in the security cooperation enterprise, we actually have like a university that's run by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency with instructors. So now they want people that are going to operate in this from the DoD enterprise or from one of the military branches to actually be educated, certified to actually go do this. So they understand what's going on, the background behind it, why we're doing it, why we're interacting with a particular country. So they know all the ins and outs of what we're doing. So we're trying to streamline that piece. The other piece is the very bottom one, the Special Defense Acquisition Fund. So they've expanded that. What that is we will do a lot of R&D and development in the U.S. military for our own needs of a new capability, whether it's a fighter jet, a particular tank, a new design on a tank or vehicle. But this allows us to actually do that with the sole intent of developing a piece of equipment that we can then sell and provide to a foreign country that needs it. For instance, Afghanistan probably doesn't need a tank like the US has, but some kind of wheeled vehicle with armament that may be different than the Humvee they need. So we'll look at ways to actually R&D that, acquire that, and then be able to provide that over to the foreign country. Okay, got one question in. Okay, so the one question is, how long is the training program before a person is deemed ready? So there is actually quite a bit of training. So for actual advisors that go on the ground and do the training and interact with foreign staffs, which would be at like core country level down, that is a 1 month course when it first started about 2.5, 3 years ago. That is expanding to a 2 month course. And that's more, I would say, tactical level on the ground to operational, a little bit higher thinking. The university stuff, that can go out to 6 months, depending on what program you're in and what you're going to advise. And then we have something out in Arizona. We actually send out a lot of the ministerial level advisors that last a couple months out there before they deploy forward to like Afghanistan to work with some of the ministerial level leaders inside the Afghan government to kind of help them out, especially on the DoD and then on the police side. And then so the question for FAOs have a completely different track, but they're all rolled up in this. So they have a course they go to. I think theirs is about 6 months. I may be off on that. But FAOs, and we can talk about this in the end, but FAOs work primarily on the country teams, which is part of that embassy team. It's kind of a military liaison on that country team. They all involved in this. This is another aspect that kind of gets weird is you have the 6 geographical combatant commands. So that's a 4-star commander that commands all military forces in one of the 6 geographical regions. So that would be NORTHCOM, which would include, the United States, where we're at, the Northwest Hemisphere, SOUTHCOM, which has South America, Europe, AFRICOM. You have Central Command, which is, the Middle East. Then you have the Indo-PACOM Command, which is Indian Ocean, like India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the whole Pacific Rim. So we've kind of divided the country up. So they'll build plans and approaches and strategies to get security cooperation in their region. And they've got to work with each one of those country teams in the embassies for a particular country strategy that's got to get melded in. So there's a lot of nuance in those. And then you've got you're right, you've got all the, and Cliff asked, they work with SOF because SOF, they just can't come into a country. The combatant commands cannot send forces in arbitrarily to a country to work with a host nation. It's got to go through the country team. You've got to get ambassador approval. And usually ambassadors work very closely with the geographic commanders to kind of make sure that their country is getting a little love and what they want to have happen in that country a little bit. Yeah, so Ben, and they do evolve greatly over time. So for instance, just how Afghanistan has changed over time. So we were very tactically focused up front, which is probably the wrong approach, right? So in Afghanistan, most of our advising and security cooperation was getting them trucks, Humvees, small arms, weapon systems, machine guns, rifles, and training them to fight. And SOF went in there and trained them to be special operations forces. The problem with that is for a military to function and have staying power, there's a lot of bureaucracy that has to be built that provides logistics, background training, and education for a military to be a long-term viable security force. So that was not happening up front. So over time, we adjusted. So now that is the primary focus. We still do some tactical efforts in targeting of particular Taliban threats, but the majority of our security cooperation and engagement with Afghanistan now is building the bureaucratic functions that actually run a large organization so that they have supply depots. They can actually provide and deliver fuel for forces. They can provide uniforms for the winter and the summer. So all that bureaucratic stuff that we kind of take for granted is happening with our back here with the companies or, the defense industry. They didn't have that built. So, and really to have long staying power as a functional security force, all that stuff's got to be built. So we kind of transitioned our focus. The other piece too that changes over time is where we put our efforts. So Afghanistan and Iraq has dominated our security cooperation efforts over the last 20 years, just because of those 2 threats and what happened on 9/11 and how we got involved in both of those. But there is a big shift to switch to the Indian Ocean, South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Rim is a focus out there just because of the competitive nature we have with China now. So we are trying to shift the majority of our effort out there. Yeah. So for Dan, so there is a list of who we cannot give particular security cooperation to. The other good thing is, so Department of State has a big play in this. So it's DOD and DOS, Department of Defense and State, that actually are heavily involved in security cooperation. So for instance, all foreign military sales and assistance, it'll get generated by a country team or a geographic commander that want to do it, but it's still got to get validated and approved by Department of State for us to actually go in and do a security cooperation effort. So Department of State has approval. Even on foreign military sales of equipment, the State Department's got to approve it. Unless it's excess, there's some authorities that are given to the Secretary of Defense. If we have excess equipment and we've already got a long-standing relationship of providing equipment, and we're involved in some contingency operations where he can provide excess military equipment to a foreign country. But Department of State gets involved heavily in DSCA, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, is really the continuity that ties those efforts together between Department of Defense and State, that works getting those approvals of all the stuff that DoD wants to do for its campaign plans and strategies with foreign countries, and get it approved by Department of State. Okay, next slide, Alison. Okay, so why do we do security cooperation? And honestly, security cooperation is what all of our geographical combatant commanders, it's what they do every single day. So it is the main thing that they do on a daily basis, is security cooperation. I know that the news is dominated by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the fighting, but this is really the bread and butter of what the U.S. military does on a daily basis. And really, it's deter aggression from potential adversaries. So the bigger alliances that you built in partnerships, one that provides access into a region for the United States, partnerships, it builds those relationships. So it raises the cost of an adversary, one, to compete, start a conflict, go to full-scale war with us, because it's not just us they'd be dealing with. They'd be dealing with other countries. It also helps other countries deter aggression within their own region. So for instance, and we've got treaty obligations with Taiwan, but that treaty obligation and the security cooperation we do with Taiwan, selling equipment, does raise this on the scale of cost to China if they want to do something to Taiwan. So it does, to a level, deter China's activities of aggressive action against Taiwan. And that happens all across the regions. For instance, in Central Command with Kuwait, our presence in Kuwait, although it's a staging and access point for us to spread out to other parts of the world, it also, our presence in Kuwait prevents any aggressive action from, or deters aggressive action from Iran. The cost goes up because now it's not just Kuwait they're dealing with. They're going to have to deal with the U.S. as a partner. And then with us, because we have such a network of partners and allies, we don't go to war alone. We bring in several other partners, NATO members, former Eastern Bloc countries, that come with us to fight in a lot of regions. So it raises the cost up. Third one, and it's a big one. So, and you guys see as the budget with COVID, no one knows what our defense budget will be, but the security cooperation effort maintains the U.S. defense industry's industrial base. It helps with that. So, because we cannot buy all the equipment that they can produce, and you've got to have enough equipment, upgrades, regular, maintenance of parts that they produce to keep that industry up. So when we really need to ramp up, it's available to call on to get it ramped up in a large scale emergency, something similar to World War I or II. But if we don't have those allies and partners around the world buying equipment that we can provide to them, the demand signal on those industries will not be there, and they will collapse. So it helps us, without us having to buy all the equipment that we don't need. It helps us keep those industries alive so that when we need, we can ramp up that stuff pretty quick. The other thing too is it allows us to compete. So security cooperation is a lower cost way to compete across the globe. So small scale conflicts, it allows us to have a small presence and a big impact. So for instance, the most recent ones with the ISIS fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, very small presence to what we used to have in those two countries. And we're getting a lot more out of it, because with a security cooperation effort with a lot of advisors in there, you can bring U.S. enablers. So our fighter jets, our bombers, our imagery with satellites, all the stuff that we bring as a country, we can help provide that and enable them, and they do the ground fighting, and we get a lot more done because they're actually better at fighting in the environments they're used to than we ever will be. And with our additional enablers and assets we bring, we get a lot more done with a smaller presence. What also provides is access and presence. We get a lot of access into regions because we work with them, and it also opens up trade and keeps the global commons opening. With the Navy, it sails just like it used to do, and we say gunboat diplomacy. It's not really gunboat diplomacy anymore, but them sailing and going to ports and working with other naval forces. One, it's freedom of navigation, it's presence, and it gets countries to want to buy our stuff and work with us more so than our competitors. Then it also promotes some liberal ideals. And honestly, the more alliances and partnerships you have, alliances generally don't fight each other, at least since World War II. So democracies tend not to go to war with each other. So the more you can kind of push those liberal ideals, and they've got to put it into their own terms. It can't just be a U.S. footprint on everything, exact model. But generally speaking, alliances prevent you from going to war with other countries within your alliance. And by promoting liberal ideals, you tend to not go to war with each other. So all that is intended to bring down so we don't have another large scale world conflict. All right, let me just check questions real quick before we go on. Okay, a little bit. So from Elliot's question, the vetting process. So it's weird. I would say it progresses depending on we increase the vetting process depending on the theater and what's going on initially. So going into Iraq and Syria in there, with the Iraqis, we already had an Iraqi army, although it gotten pushed out of Mosul by ISIS. We'd already worked with those guys and had partnerships built. So for example, when I went into fight in Mosul, and not me fighting, I was just enabling and dropping bombs and using all our drones and stuff for those guys to actually do the ground fighting. Those guys that I fought with them and was advising them in 2017, those generals were battalion commanders that I was partnered with when I was there in 06, 07 as a captain. So I'd already built relationships. I went over there and we're shaking hands. They still have pictures on their phones from us together from previously. So some earlier security cooperation efforts I had done as a company commander paid dividends in 17 as I already built relationships. So for the Iraqi army, not a whole lot of vetting. Although there is some vetting when you look at the militia groups, the Shia militia groups that were there, that army will pass some equipment off. So generally speaking, when they don't follow some of the rules that we have set in the security cooperation, we will not work with them again if they violate something. We won't necessarily provide them a certain equipment. We'll stop advising them. We could not advise Shia militia groups. It was strictly Iraqi army, government backed, officiated inside the army. So we couldn't advise those guys if they were on the ground together. So there's some little bit of difficulties in there. The Syrian force, a lot of times we're just looking for somebody in some of these contingency operations that have kind of bubbled up as an emergency. We're looking for a force that really shares some of the same common interests as us initially. And then as that relationship progresses, we're looking to vet them more and make sure that it doesn't turn into something that's against our national interests later on. For instance, in Afghanistan, there's a lot of corruption in Afghanistan. However, as we provide fuel and other logistics, and what we do is we kind of funnel that through at the national level and let them work their systems of how they distribute that stuff so they can build some capabilities and how they do that. We cut off certain funding. I feel if there is a national level or regional level leaders that are siphoning fuel off a top to sell to other people to make money. So as we catch that, then we actually try and go in and prosecute too, and get them out of the system. So there are some vetting that goes on initially, and we help make decisions with some of their decisions on who they want to potentially promote. We'll give some, if we have information on people, we'll provide that some of their leadership so they can make some educated decisions. But it does progress as the conflict or our involvement actually matures as well. Okay, so is there any foreign commands that are restricted from participating in security cooperation? So all of our geographic commands. So are you talking, just real quick on that question, Benjamin, are you talking foreign countries? So us with foreign country commands, or our actual commands that are in foreign countries, like US commands in foreign countries? And then Alison, if you want to switch to the next slide while Ben clarifies that for me. Okay, so I mean, there are some countries. So I would say actually, so up front, I would say no. There's authorities and limits to what we can do. So, for instance, you would probably think that we probably can't do security cooperation with Russia or China. However, in particular in Syria, there's a lot of military engagement and dialogue that goes on that actually is security cooperation to prevent us from making a mistake with each other. So it doesn't escalate into something larger. So on a lot of the countries you would think there are no's, there is some dialogue to make sure we don't make mistakes. Most of the geographic commands, they're going to put their campaign plans, they'll get briefed to the SecDev, approval by Department of State, and they'll be able to interact with that. But there are very few countries that are absolutely off limits. The one that would probably come to mind in this in Middle East is probably Iran. That would be completely off limits of us going in and doing anything that we've kind of discussed in the brief would be the big one that would stand out to me, at least until things change between us. Yeah, so Genevieve, that's a good question. So and those items you're discussing, so sharing, geospatial assets, imagery, all that satellite stuff, really that goes to trust with a particular country. So, and there are a lot of limits on security classifications, whether it's secret, top secret, unclassified, but for official use only. And each country that we interact with is vetted at different levels to be able to look at particular information. We also have foreign disclosure officers that can actually pare some of those particular items down or imagery down so that we can actually share it and talk on with some of our partners. But that's a lot of what they're looking for. For instance, as we start shifting, as India is becoming a big partner, especially as we look at competing in China, a lot of that stuff, they're a very capable military and country with a lot of resources. And that's one of the things they're looking for from us, is be able to share some of that imagery and intelligence to kind of help get at some of the common interests we have, or national interests we have with them. So that's a big one. In Iraq and Afghanistan, it just depended. If there was a need to know and we had to show them something to get a particular target done or operation, we had to share information and get approval to share those particular imagery assets. The other thing too is they'd ask us, hey, I'd love to know this or that, or what's going on here. And then we would do is put in a task request to get particular imagery requests to be able to figure out we can solve what they're trying to know or figure out what they're asking, so we can provide that information back to them so they can make a decision and kind of help with their operations. They may never actually see the classified document and how we collected it, which is usually the how we collected it is usually what is classified, but we'll give them the end result of, hey, here's what you need to know and here's what's important for you to help make your decision. So that's kind of some of the stuff we do. But depending on what kind of ally, the Five Eyes, the 5 English-speaking countries, Australia, England, New Zealand, we have special considerations with them, and we share a lot of the stuff you're talking about with geospatial and imagery with those particular countries, a lot more with all the NATO countries, and then it just kind of goes down from there. Okay, on this slide, guys, so this is some of, this is security cooperation exercises. This is specifically in Indo-PACOM. So that is just a portion of a list of exercises and operation, the security cooperation realm that goes on just in the Indian Pacific Command with US military. And those exercises that are listed there, some of them are annual, some are biannual, some are every other year. And the good thing about these operations and exercises is they take a lot of planning that goes in. So there's going to be a lot of travel of US advisors flying over to foreign countries, doing planning exercises, working resources, and a lot of negotiation and work goes on between mill to mill engagement. There's also a lot of diplomacy that goes on with country teams and U.S. ambassadors working back Department of State and with the foreign countries to get us access. Not every soldier in the U.S. has a passport. So getting passport and visa clearance. So all that stuff goes on the diplomatic side. So these exercises provide a great format for a lot of engagement between our diplomats and our military to build relationships over time. And they consistently happen year after year. Now, these exercises, they go all the way from, a typical military battalion, tanks, Humvees, or large infantry formations operating together so we can figure out if we do go to war together or need to, how do we communicate with each other? How do you do things? How do we do things? And how can we kind of mix the two to get the best results we're trying to get? All the way to, we'll do humanitarian and medical exercises with U.S. medical personnel. We'll practice humanitarian disaster response with our Navy and Marine Corps. So it runs the full gamut. And a lot of this is non-threatening because we're not going in and fighting anyone. We're just going on in training, and we get a lot of bang for our buck on the humanitarian and natural disaster response exercises we do with countries, because we're doing there to do positive things versus responding to something that's the worst in human. The human condition is going to war with each other. So it's more of a positive influence we see out there. In a lot of the Pacific Pathways that's down there, that's kind of it was developed about 5-6 years ago, and that's sending a lot of advisors and military out, and they basically go from country to country doing exercises and engagements across the Pacific Rim, and they'll do that for about 6 months, and then another battalion will rotate out there. But the other good thing about this is, besides all the other international organizations out there, like Southeast Asia has one, RIMPAC is one. We tend to do these exercises. We do some of them bilaterally, but we try to include as many countries as we can to kind of build that alliance and partnership before if we have a disaster or conflict come up, we have more partners that can get involved and deal with national caveats, which is, what are the rules of their country? What are their authorities? If we do have to respond to something, what will they bring to the table? How can we help and assist that? So really, these are great exercises. And honestly, I don't know if a lot of people realize how much stuff we do throughout a year with other countries across the world besides just Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a lot of moving pieces that the U.S. military is really it's a diplomatic force that goes out there and works with foreign countries and kind of sells American ideals, American national values, and puts a good face on America out there for what we're capable of doing. One question by Elliot there. Okay, Elliot, great question on Department of State. So they also have a geographic structure similar to our geographic COCOMs that are out there in the world. The weird thing is they closely align with the geographic commands of the military, but they're not 100%. So there are countries that are in Central Command, which is, Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, and Egypt, all the way out to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then the stands across the top of it. And basically the central region that for the Department of State does not include all those same states. So they're a little bit disjointed. The other weird thing is on the Department of State, the ambassador to the country team, his chain of command goes country team, Secretary of State. Although they have like a regional director that tries to streamline stuff, they are not, for lack of a better term, in the chain of command between a country ambassador and the Secretary of State. So a little bit different from us. That combatant commander is in charge of all military forces in whatever country in his combatant command. And it goes from, all those different, what they'll call joint task forces or subordinate military forces in his combatant command. He goes from them to him and then to the Secretary of Defense. So a little bit different. They are a mid-tier command structure before the national. There's really no regional command structure in the Department of State that goes from ambassador to Department of State. Alison, if you can go next slide. Okay, so this is a unique program within security cooperation. So National Guard Partnership Program, this really happened after the fall of the Soviet Union with some of those Eastern Bloc countries. And you don't really need to worry, I know it's kind of an eye chart there, but we have National Guard states that partner with foreign countries to kind of work governance, in some engagement with their military, and they usually deploy a National Guard member from that state as like a liaison with the country team, and they build a ongoing relationship that lasts year after year. The problem with active duty is usually after a year, maybe two, all of us on active duty move jobs all over the place and don't really build lasting relationship over time. And if it happens like kind of like I did with me in Mosul, we do it by luck. It is not by planning, which is kind of one of the problems that I'm writing my paper on for my other master's degree is we've got to align those efforts better. But we miss the mark on that sometimes. It happens by accident. But the National Guard Partnership Program is they've had relationships with their people and their soldiers and their airmen and airwomen over time with these foreign countries. So it's a great resource for active duty to tap into and bring them on board when we're doing engagements and exercises with foreign country. It's doing some study and research. If you look at the National Guard units that are partnered with some of these foreign countries, when we do exercises, we're probably about 65% of the time we actually use that National Guard unit to come forward on the exercise with us and actually engage in it. And then majority of the time we are helping them. They are helping us on the active side with planning and engagements and getting our foot in the door to interact with that foreign country. But only about 60% of the time are we actually able to get them forward and involved in the exercise or the operation. Alison, can you go next slide? Okay, so what domains are we cooperating with? So, and we were in the. I wouldn't say we're late to the game, but we're just getting fully on board. Cyber Command's a couple years old for the cyber domain, and there's a lot of discussion. Is cyber a domain? Officially for the military, it is. It's also a tool where we do a lot of things across cyber. So, a human domain is big. So we work a lot on the human side. Everything is about relationships and understanding human dynamics, cultures, why cultures developed out of geographic regions. Understanding that is huge. And that's some of the stuff we've missed early on. We learned it actually years ago and decades ago, and then we forget it. It seems like every time we go into a new conflict, then we learn it as we get toward the end. But human domain is huge. Land obviously is huge because all people live on land. On the space domain, we are whether or not you call it security cooperation, we do cooperate with Russia a lot in space to get our astronauts up there, at least in the last couple of years until we were able to do it ourselves with some of the new civilian companies that are building the rockets. But on the space domain, we'll work security cooperation, which is sharing the outcomes of our assets that are up in space, our satellites and stuff, and help provide that. In the cyber, we're working with some of the foreign countries to bolster up their cyber defense and do some stuff with them, which is becoming a big one. As you look at Iran and Russia, they are very active in the cyber realm. So are some of our adversaries, the extremist groups, the Taliban. They're very active in the cyber realm, one for messaging, and then some of the nation states that are big on cyber attacks. So we're working with we work with our countries trying to identify and work through the post-action, who did what, how did it happen? So that is also some of those. And then in the Army, we're looking at making what they're calling like multi-domain task forces that have capability to operate across all the domains. So cyber, space, air, land, and sea, to work with countries across all those domains and provide some capability. So we're looking at expanding and getting a little bit better, but we're really not there yet. Yeah, so Jonathan, great question. So we are currently expanding our relationship with India. So India is looked at as a very important partner. We do a lot of humanitarian exercises with India. They're also big on bringing in some of our a lot of naval exercises with India. We also do officer exchanges with India. They have officers come here. We send some over there, but we have not really engaged as much as we should with India. Really to help them out with their extremist problem. We do a lot of transnational criminal work with them on the Navy and Coast Guard side, and some piracy stuff, but we've been limited in some of the counterterrorism on the Indian subcontinent. So looking at these pictures, just wanted to show you guys just for some context. So upper right, that is a a screen you see on the TV screen, that is a quadcopter that we actually fought off of. It actually provided better imagery than some of the high-tech stuff we used. That's a Iraqi division commander watching his forces fight and directing his brigade commanders via really a walkie-talkie, kind of a secure walkie-talkie through watching a quadcopter. So we do a lot of tactical advising there and providing fire, so artillery or missile strikes from fighters on enemy positions in support of them. On the left, that is actually the governor of Mosul that's in the suit kind of standing up, and some of the Iraqi security forces that were involved in operations in Iraq. So it's not only are we advising the military side, we're also working with the government side to try and tie the two together so they can get some common approach, because it's not just a military solution in a lot of these countries. They've got to have a kind of a governmental and political solution that kind of complements it. Otherwise, they never solve the real problems that led to the conflict to begin with. On the bottom left, that is a lot of the security forces from Afghanistan on what was called Train, Assist, and Advise Command East, from really about 7 provinces right around the Khyber Pass area. And that is working security solutions inside Jalalabad city, just talking to regional stuff. To the middle right, that is my old boss working with the governor of Jalalabad. We had to work with him quite a bit because in different countries, political leaders have different powers. So big profile governors of big provinces had a lot of influence and political power over some of the military officials. So you had to bridge the two together to kind of get some real goals met. And then in the bottom right, you can see Afghan officers flying in with us. We flew in to engage one, that's a division officer flying in to meet some of the subordinate brigades and kind of do assessments on their logistics, their personnel matters, kind of the sustainment side of the organizational structure versus looking at them tactically. So we'd fly in with those guys and some of their leadership to kind of assess brigades and get a feel for what was going on. So, and that's really just to show you the wide range of what we do is military advisors and security cooperation professionals. When we go out there, it'll work from government people all the way down to tactical stuff and some operational and regional stuff with our military folks. So on this slide, I want to talk some current stuff of how we did some stuff. So really what we're trying to do is, when you look at a lot of these kind of wicked problems with conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's really hard to say, hey, this is the end state and we're going to get there. They're complex problems built on years of cultural issues, religious issues, what have you. And really, we're just trying to get an acceptable level of stability or condition that we can slowly pull away from and keep our engagement at, more a governmental or diplomatic level, because they can handle the security on their own. And that really takes time. We're not really, it's kind of tough to go, hey, we're going to go defeat the enemy, because it's more nuanced than that in a lot of these theaters. So security cooperation is a much better approach than going in with a big hammer to deal with some of these countries. So, and it's hard because you're trying to defeat a threat, you and your partnered nation and their government forces, while increasing their capacity. So, it's hard. They're trying to fight a war and build a complete organizational structure and bureaucracies that support it at the same time. And that is a very tough thing to do. So we're trying to manage that. And a lot of times we used to focus on just the fighting, but now we've realized it's the bureaucracy and organizational structure that actually gives them the staying power. The other benefit of this too is, if you look at the ISIS model, we went in and liberated Mosul. The Iraqi security forces, they fought that fight on the ground. So they shared a lot of the day-to-day grind and burden with a small U.S. presence and the ability to access our fighter jets, our imagery, to enable them on the ground to win. So we were basically using I would say about 60 people. So about 15 to 20 advisors and staff that worked with a Iraqi division, and about 40 people that provided security around our perimeter to be able to work with them to get a division to fight to clear Mosul. So that is a model that at the time General Milley liked, because it was a very small presence, but extremely effective in defeating ISIS. And we started expanding that, and we built 5 active duty security force assistance brigades, which are just conventional Army guys of different branches that come together, similar to a SOF team to complement them. But we can go in and work fires, just like SOF guys can enable them. But we also do a lot of the bureaucracy and organizational structure and sustainment work with them, so they actually have some long-staying power and can sustain themselves in a fight. We also provide, the security cooperation provides a lot of time and space for a host nation. So in a fledgling country, as they're trying to develop and gain some clout in the international world, get stability, really the governments need time and space to figure things out and get better. And it just takes time. When you look at the South Koreans, after World War II, we were advising them before the Korean War and then afterward. And there was a little bit of insurgency there as well. It took a long time to get where they're at now. So things don't happen overnight. So a lot of security cooperations provide that space and time that allows them to get better and become a stable country. Obviously, we provide equipment. We provide equipment both to Iraq and Afghanistan. The nuance with that is you got to be careful when you provide equipment to a foreign country. Can that country actually have the capacity to sustain equipment? It'd be great to give, Afghanistan fighter jets, but they don't have the infrastructure, the gross domestic product, mechanics. They don't have anything to sustain a fighter jet. So it's just a waste to sell them a fighter jet, waste the valuable money they do have on a program that will disappear. So providing equipment is not as nuanced as just giving them great equipment. They've got to be able to sustain it, get parts for it, fix it, if they're going to sustain that particular program. The other thing we learned over these two conflicts is we've got to advise at echelon. So you can't just go out and advise tactical level leaders. It's got to be done all the way up, all the way from their generals that are in command of certain things down to the small level of the tactics. Otherwise, it won't happen. You'll be taking formations in different directions, and no one's on the same sheet of music. So you've got to advise at different levels. Governance and humanitarian securities are huge. So even when I just worked in Afghanistan for the last 2 years on the eastern region, a lot of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, had to work with them, and they can help with flooding and other humanitarian issues that are going on in an area, which allows you inroads to certain government officials in a region as you help out their particular province and get at some security issues and help build some programs and some stability for their people. So the big piece is a lot of these conflict areas obviously are humanitarian securities. If people feel secure, they're prospering, they have access to money, resources, food, their voices can be heard, conflict is less likely to happen. So how do you get at that stuff? And that's through governance. So really the military provides the space and security for that stuff to prosper and happen. That's really where your focus should be. We should be less focused on killing people that are bad. And we should be looking at the problems that really created the conflict and the purpose and try and win those guys back over. So that's a lot of what security cooperation has done. And then I already talked some of the security force assistance brigades, but that is a big shift in the Army. We pulled a lot of key leaders. So on a security force assistant brigade, every officer and NCO that is in non-commissioned officer that's in those brigades has to have already done their job at their position in a previous unit. So we take a lot of senior people and bring them over, and it put a lot of stress on the Army when we built these things, but which shows the importance that the Department of Defense, the Army is seen in security cooperation and advising and engagement more so than just coming in with a hammer and trying to crush bad guys. So we've seen to compete internationally with some of our competitors, Russia, China, it's all about engagement and doing good things with countries to kind of keep the threshold of conflict down. And that's the way to approach things versus large scale conventional forces. Okay, let me look at some of the questions that are out there. Okay, no more. If you want to go next slide, Alison. Okay, so I just threw this picture up just so some of you guys can see this. That is Jalalabad city in Afghanistan, and that was taken summer of 2020. I think I took that picture in June. You can see some of the government compounds. They got a big soccer stadium. So it is a lot more developed than you probably imagine. Although there are a lot of areas in Afghanistan that are completely dirt ridden and they're living in huts. But a lot of the cities are very well developed. And those streets are packed with cars during the day. So, and that was not the case when we first went in 20 years ago. So to put in context, where Afghanistan was 20 years ago, we went in 2001, they didn't have cell phone networks, they didn't have brand new cars. So a lot of their development has happened over the last 20 years, even though they've been a nation in conflict. They are better off today financially and just modern technologies and access to stuff in the world than they were 20 years ago, even though they've been in conflict the whole time. So when you look at it, are we being successful or not in Afghanistan? The overall quality of life of somebody in Afghanistan is better than it was under the Taliban regime. There's still a lot of people dying though because of the conflict, but the overall quality of life is improved. So, I mean, to some, depending on what lens you look through, you can look for different successes and failures in some of our engagements, but it's key to just keep some perspective on what actually is changing in particular zones and regions that we're engaging in. Okay, so that's kind of the formal brief. If anyone's got any questions, you can throw them in there before we, I guess, conclude for the day. And any questions you want to ask military in general, what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq recently, it's fair game to ask questions.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to go ahead and open up, move people out of the participant role and allow them to come onto the voice role.
Thanks, Andy. And if anybody would still like to leave anything in the chat or speak up as Alison is giving you micro rights, please do so now. We can do a little over time, but we obviously will conclude within the next few minutes. So thanks, Andy, so much. It's been very insightful. Thank you also for your responsiveness to our participants' questions here. Great. And please speak up or go ahead and use the chat as you prefer.
Hello, Andy. Quick question for you. It's not meant to be insulting in nature, but it may come across that way.
Okay.
You know, try to help me understand. I'm an average American, struggling at the poverty level, not paying my bills, losing my house, all that kind of stuff. How do you make a person like me understand the value of what you're trying to do with the security cooperation, you know, thousands of miles away in other parts of the world, or how does that benefit me from, do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so you're right. So when we look, so security cooperation, not a new thing. So really it's how America grew to power. The World Wars kind of put us over the top, but the Navy and Marine Corps, much of the 1800s, engagement all across the world opened up economic, access to countries for trade and industry. So a lot of this stuff is where in the world can people buy stuff that we produce, even though we buy much of our stuff produced overseas. It provides us some trade avenues. So that military engagement in most cases ends up turning into economic opportunities for companies in the US to trade with those particular countries. It also provides, to be honest with you, like JJ, in India, it also is reciprocal. So they take a lot of our, jobs back when we talk in cyber tech and all that other stuff. So it is a nuanced approach. Now, the good thing about security cooperation is it does reduce overall military costs. So what it does is it prevents, the goal behind it, and the theory is it prevents long-term conflict by building allies and partners. So really your overall defense budget on a particular year could come down. You keep it kind of mothballed, ready to go for something if it happens that you can turn on. But your year-to-year engagements you can do with a much smaller force than you can with what we've been doing for the last 20 years is large conventional forces, 100,000 people in Iraq, and that costs a lot of money. So if you reduce defense spending, obviously that money can be turned back around to other programs in the United States, if that makes sense. It's not clean, JJ, by any means. But I will tell you this, from the Army side, we do see the COVID, and we're looking at ways, because the defense budget's either going to stay neutral or probably go down just due to COVID, because the cost of of COVID, the COVID response. So we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. But really the whole goal is to try and prevent a large scale war that costs us a whole lot more in money, but also resources in life. So that's the goal behind it.
Thanks both. And AJ is a PhD student in our Homeland Security specialization in the Admin Public Administration PhD program. So he's supposed to come up with critical thinking, which he demonstrated. So thanks, JJ, for the question. Andy, thanks for the response. Who would like to be next before we conclude?
Hey, JJ, the other thing I would add, So security cooperation, because we build a relationship with our countries, it does help with immigration. So we do get some key people that immigrate to the United States from some of these countries, like people that are really smart. We get PhDs, doctors, cyber techs, a lot of guys that are good in different areas that we don't necessarily have all the expertise in. So because the country progresses, we tend to have less kids. We do get some good immigration in from this, where you look at some of our adversaries like Russia, because they don't do this as well. They don't get the immigration of expertise like the US does. Not that the security cooperation is what that drives that, but it does help in some of the engagements and stuff. For instance, that one picture I showed of my boss working with the governor of Jalalabad, he is actually a US citizen that lives in Virginia also. All of his kids are medical doctors that actually work in Virginia. So, you know, we wouldn't necessarily have 3 more doctors in Virginia unless we had that engagement with him. So.
Gary has
a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for you. And it has to do with your comment about building relationships and how the military in the past learns at the end of a conflict. Yeah, the importance of building relationships is so very important, but then we tend to forget it when we're not in a conflict. And I think you had mentioned that you were actually working on, as part of your master's program, a solution to that problem. And I've seen a lot of organizations do the same thing, projects, major initiatives where we reflect and say, hey, we have some serious lessons that we can learn from and benefit from in the future. We tend to forget them. Are there things that you've seen the military do that have been effective in taking some of those lessons learned and moving them forward tactically?
Yeah, so Carrie, so the first big one was, so we have done security cooperation with mixed results, and even Vietnam was the start of a security cooperation effort. But we never had formally trained advisors. What we were doing up until really the last 3 years is we would tell an organization, hey, we need 3 advisors to go here. And when a unit has to give up 3 people to go do an advising mission, they'll pick some good people, but they're going to pick people that necessarily aren't extremely important to what they're currently doing for whatever that commander or organization sees as success. So we were advising with pickup teams that were trained over 2 weeks, and their training they received really for much of the last war was 2 weeks of training that would really make them gel as a team to keep them alive. It had nothing to do with actually advising skills. So coming out of that, General Milley saw some success with Mosul in a model, but not necessarily how we picked people, because that was still random how we built units to do that. And now we have a formal structure with these security force assistance brigades, where we actually have formally trained advisors that their whole career path will be going back and forth between a conventional force for a year or 2 and then back to an advising role, so they can maintain regional relationships over time. So for instance, I will probably be stuck with CENTCOM, not stuck with it, but I'll be with CENTCOM, so the Middle East, for the rest of my career. And the goal was to get us to go back and forth between advising and conventional, so we can leverage our previous engagements and relationships from that region over time. The good thing is, one of the other lessons learned is you've got to train advisors. And then you've got, because engagements and interaction with human beings is very important, you've got to have the right personnel and the right personalities to do that. So just for an example, a guy who joined the Army that just wants to kick in a door and go shoot bad guys from a Ranger regiment or like Delta Force, that may not be the right guy that has a personality that you want to send over to work with a foreign staff, or that has to have some empathy of the situation they're in when you're trying to help them. So a lot of guys join to kick in doors. And there's a mix of us that also like working with foreign countries and have some empathy. So we now are doing personality traits, intelligence studies. Can they actually write? Can they interact? How do they communicate? And we're rolling all that in when we select advisors. And now all our advisors have to volunteer to do it. So it means they've got to actually want to do it. We're not going to force them to do it. They have to go through a selection process, an interview process, and then pass the 2 months of training that goes into personality tests and some other stuff to actually get into an advising unit in position. If that makes sense, Carrie.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Gels so well with the course that I'm taking in my master's program at Penn State, where we're focused on teaming. So this is perfect. Thank you so much, Andy.
No problem, Carrie.
Hey,
last thing, I can answer Elliot's question real quick, and then we can Elliot, so mission creep is a big problem. The problem with mission creep is it's always going to happen. So we just got to recognize it. And the reason it happens is when you look at the interagency or the departments across the U.S. government, the U.S. military is the only one that really has a planning capacity and a large force to do things. Department of State has a fraction of the budget the Department of Defense does, and people. So when it comes to capability, capacity to get things done, move resources and plan a response, it heavily falls on the military because they're the ones with the resources. You know, us military guys, we like to go, why isn't the Department of State in here to fix? We kind of get done breaking things, but it really is a military role because we have the resources to do it. What we should be doing is working with them instead of turning a blind eye to working with, you know, organizations like USAID. We need to include them more into our planning process and interact with them a little bit more than we do. Over.
Yeah, that makes a
Andy.
ton of sense. I just, it occurred to me as a last minute iceberg to throw in the way of everybody's evenings there. Reminded me though of a book back in, God, I don't know, 01, 03, the Pentagon's new map. Guy was talking about exactly what we're trying to operationalize today. So not a new concept, just trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Andy, and also thanks, Elliot, for the question. I believe we have to leave it at that. We are 8 minutes over. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I would like to present, Andy, our certificate of appreciation to you. Thank you so much for your turn into alma mater for this webinar. That's been great, and we're also going to send you that via email, obviously. So thank you. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked the questions. I think you did because you provided some great responses, I thought. Alison, thanks again for organizing. Everybody, thanks for coming. Please consider returning for our next webinars in this series. So the very next will be a presentation by Brian Harrell, who is was assistant director at Kiser, at the new cyber agency of DHS, but he returned to the private sector. We'll talk about critical infrastructure protection with an emphasis on the energy sector and what occurred and still is continuing to hit our students, faculty, and friends in Texas and other states. That makes that an unfortunately timely, highly relevant topic. So hope we'll see you again here in our webinar series in a week. With that, thanks again, Andy. It's time to conclude. And stay safe, stay out of the snow, and keep us on top of your bucket list when it comes to webinars. We love it. It's a great experience. And see you next week, hopefully. Take care. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.